Hi everyone, I'm on section 1.3 macromolecules, and this is information that you should have gotten in another class before taking microbiology. I include it just to remind you, if it doesn't sound familiar, that you really need to review it. The level of detail I'm going to go into right now, I do this because these are things that I'm assuming that you know in future lectures. So if you don't know this information, look over it. This is something that you should know by now for biology. Anybody doing any kind of sciencey major has to know this really basic chemistry. So let's run through it real fast. You've already done in other classes, you've learned about elements and you've learned about atoms and the parts of atoms. And so remember, when we put atoms together and we make chemical bonds, we have molecules. And so molecules, your book uses the word macromolecules. It also uses the word for groups of biochemicals. I usually call them the 4 groups of organic molecules, but there's 4 major groups of large molecules or large organic molecules that are important to all living things. And you should be able to name these 4 groups of molecules. They're the carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. So if I ask you, what are the 4 major groups of organic molecules, or what are the 4 major groups of macromolecules in living organisms, you would say carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Now, you've got to get in your mind just a little bit about these, because I'm going to use these terms throughout the semester, assuming that you know what they are. They talk a little bit here about how they have all of them except for lipids have subunits called monomers, single units, and then they're put together by chemical bonds into chains called polymers. So again, those are terms that you're going to hear. There is a nice table here that summarizes all this information: carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. You'll notice in the lecture study guide, I have a table under practice questions. And it says, what's the molecule and what's the major function in cells like bacteria, like single-celled organisms like bacteria. And so you can use this. When you look at carbohydrates, here's some examples. They should sound familiar. And what are they used? Oh, they're involved in metabolic reactions. Let's see, composed, they make cell walls. They make food storage. So probably the number one thing that you're going to remember about carbohydrates is this part, and that they're a major source of energy. But there are some structural molecules too. So we'll talk about those as we go through the semester. Lipids, and you can see all the different kinds of lipids. Oh, phospholipids should sound familiar. Steroids should sound familiar. What are their major functions? They cell membranes. You might remember about phospholipids and cell membranes. And that's probably one of the biggest things in single cells. You can say they're a storage form of energy, but that's usually for multicellular organisms. Proteins. They have chains of amino acids. Proteins are major structural components of cells, and they perform metabolic reactions because they make up the enzymes. So proteins are really important. I heard somebody one time say, when you look in a mirror, you see protein. And I think that's a really great way to keep protein in your mind, that it's most of our structure, both inside and on the outside of our bodies and our cells. And finally, nucleic acids. That's the DNA and RNA. Actually, ATP is a nucleic acid too. And these are our molecules that allow us for inheritance traits to be passed from one generation to the next, and the expression of genetic traits. So you can use this to fill in that table under your practice questions. You can see that your book goes into more detail about all of these, and some of the vocabulary that you can see there when we're talking about carbohydrates. We're talking about sugars and other. There's also we have sugars and polysaccharides. And remember, monosaccharide is 1 unit of sugar, so there's a monosaccharide. Glucose is, usually that one has 6 carbons. They can usually have 5 or 6 carbons. Glucose is a monosaccharide, and we're going to talk about glucose this semester because it's a really important source of energy for cells. Some carbohydrates have 2 units. They're called disaccharides, or they have many units called polysaccharides. Lipids, here they're going, lipids are the fats and oils. And so it's talking a little bit about those. I think there's another section that I'll show you a little bit more. Proteins are chains of amino acids and big long chains that make up the enzymes and other structural molecules. And then here it talks a little bit about the structure of nucleic acid, DNA and RNA. So the couple of the vocabulary words I wanted you to know with carbohydrates, I have, let's see, one here it talks about this molecule called chitin. Chitin is a polysaccharide, and it's that exoskeleton in insects and in shellfish. And we're going to talk about that when we mention fungi, how they actually are somewhat related to insects because they also have chitin in their walls. I think that talks a little bit about glucose, and we can go on from there. We're going to mention a couple. So we mentioned chitin, the polysaccharide. We're also going to mention cellulose because it's another chain of glucose that is a polysaccharide, and it makes up the cell walls of plants. So that should be familiar. Lipids. We're going to just mention phospholipid, the lipids that make up the phospholipid bilayer in cell membranes. And we're going to do just a little bit with steroids because I mentioned cholesterol and something. Cholesterol is a steroid, but remember that that's a lipid. Here's just a diagram of that phospholipid bilayer that makes up cell membranes, and there's some cholesterol stabilizing it. So there's all lipid there. Proteins. To a large extent, the structure, behavior, and unique qualities of each living organism is a consequence of the proteins they contain. Remember, the building blocks of proteins are amino acids. People get amino acids and nucleic acids mixed up. Amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. You see there's about 20 different amino acids. Nucleic acids is the major group of which DNA and RNA are part of. So let's see, protein structure. It goes into some detail here about protein structure. I think you've gotten this in other classes. The thing I want you to remember for this class is that the shape of a protein, so here's when the protein's being made, it's a chain of amino acids. But there's processes in cells that actually fold those chains up and give proteins a unique shape. And this is different than the other biomolecules or the other organic molecules because the other ones all have about the same shape. All phospholipids are about the same. All DNA molecules are about the same kind of shape. But each protein has a unique shape, and that unique shape is going to give its function. And there's a vocabulary word. I think I put it in there. Yeah, when I put in the vocabulary word, I refer to a denatured enzyme or a denatured protein. If I take a protein and you use physical or chemical means to unfold it, the protein no longer performs its function. We say the protein is denatured. And so that's going to be an important characteristic when we start talking about controlling microbial growth. Let's see, other things are proteins. They make up enzyme structure, which is the chemicals that speed up chemical reactions or control our metabolism. And antibodies are made of proteins. Those are the molecules in our blood that defend us against pathogens. And finally, here's that little reference to proteins being denatured. Finally, nucleic acids. Nucleic acids are DNA and RNA. And remember that this is a genetic material of the cell. DNA is used to make RNA, and RNA is used to make protein. So all of that, you just want to kind of remind yourself of that and review it if you're rusty on chemistry. And a lot of people say, oh, I'm not good at chemistry. Well, you just have to just review it. Go review it. You can review this just like anything else. You're going to hear these words again. Here you go. I love these NCLEX prep questions that they throw in the book. A nurse is caring for a patient with refractory epilepsy. To enhance medical management, a ketogenic diet has been prescribed. In educating the patient about dietary energy sources, all the following statements are true, except proteins consist of polymers of nucleic acids. Fat provides more kilocalories per gram of protein. We didn't mention that, but that's true. A high-fat diet may cause increased serum cholesterol levels. Oh, cholesterol is a steroid, which is a fat, so eating high fat causes high cholesterol. That makes sense. And starch is an example of a carbohydrate, and that's true. It's a polymer of glucose. So the first one, proteins consist of polymers of nucleic acids. No, polymers of amino acids. And this is nice because you can click on the answer and it gives you it right there. Okay, so I highly recommend trying those. The last molecule I have right here is ATP. And ATP is considered a nucleic acid. Probably a lot of you remember that ATP, adenosine triphosphate, is a high energy molecule. It's an energy carrier in cells. And that's going to come up this semester. Finally, in this section, I just wanted to mention a little bit about cells. Most of what you've learned about cells has been about eukaryotic cells, and we're going to be spending a lot of time talking about prokaryotic cells in addition. So you need to have a little familiarity. Remember, cells have organelles. They have here we go. Cells have distinct shapes. They have a cytoplasmic membrane around the outside. They have DNA. They have ribosomes. And they're pretty complex. There's different cell types, bacterial, archaeal. Remember, those are the prokaryotes, and the eukaryotes. Remember, the eukaryotic cells have all sorts of organelles. Fortunately, prokaryotic cells don't have as many organelles, but remind yourself just what you know about eukaryotic cells. So when we do something a little bit different with prokaryotes, you'll have an appreciation for it. So on that note, I would say go for it. There's a couple questions. Oh, no, there's not any questions with that. Okay, just the table to fill out. Good luck.